All right, well, we're going back to Harare now, where crowds have started arriving in Zimbabwe as they await the arrival of former President Robert Mugabe's body.
So these are the live visuals and we take you live there.
Well, so this is the plane, I believe, that we're expecting that the remains of former President Robert Mugabe have arrived from Singapore, where he died in a hospital. He'd been receiving treatment there for a number of years, over the years, going there regularly, but he spent quite a bit of time recently before he passed on. So this is him arriving in Zimbabwe, and funeral arrangements, I guess, already being made, but his body will lie in state for the next 2 days. And initially it's going to be at a place called Rufaro Stadium, which was the biggest stadium in the country before the national sports the national stadium was built after independence. And the scene of the celebrations for independence going back 1980. So that's where he's going to be laying in state for 2 days. And then the public will have another opportunity, I believe, on Saturday before he gets buried. And we're not sure, as we were saying earlier, Palesa, whether it's going to be at the National Heroes Acre or if it's going to be at his communal homeland.
Yes, indeed, of course. Prior to his death, Peter, there were newspaper reports indicating that he had told his relatives that he did not want to be buried at the National at the Heroes Acre. So as we said, we are yet to see and hear from the government as to whether this matter has been concluded.
All right, so flags are flying at half-mast across the country at this stage, and people mourning. He was loved, and also I guess there were those that criticized him for his rule over the 37 years that he was a president of the country. But at this time, particularly culturally, people don't like to speak ill of the dead. But dignitaries from other parts of the continent certainly will be coming through. He was always a prominent figure on the African continent, admired by many. Many felt that he was unafraid to speak, especially to power, Western powers, and share his thoughts. So many people will certainly be attending this funeral, but as I can see now, that's probably pretty much government in its totality will be there to receive the president's remains.
Yes, indeed, of course. Former President Robert Mugabe was indeed, as you said, Peter, idolized as a champion of racial reconciliation. This was when he came into power in 1980 and led Zimbabwe through its best years when it was the breadbasket of the Southern Africa. However, his leadership was a bit tainted by the brutal massacres in the Madebele land back in 1983. A lot of people really referring to that, but as you say that in an African culture, you cannot talk bad of the dead.
Yeah, so a legacy that people are still debating. It's mixed, a very difficult story to tell. But, you know, one of our colleagues, Krivani Pillay, said that the best way to tell the story of Robert Mugabe is just to tell it chronologically. The events that took place throughout his life, and then let people make up their minds, because certain things happened at certain times, and people will have their view about what those events meant. But I suppose all eyes now on what definitely has marked the end of an era, not just in Zimbabwean politics, but I think in African terms as well. He was always one of those towering figures at the African Union. Whenever he addressed the United Nations, people were expecting something to come out of President Robert Mugabe. And he had those spats with certain powers, Tony Blair, one of them, always quick with his wit and sharp with his words, was President Mugabe. Brilliantly clever man, as many as 7 degrees. I think at one stage there was no doubt that he was perhaps the most educated head of state in the world. And education was always something that was very, very important to him.
Yes, indeed, of course. I think that's one of the legacies that many people have referred to, that education was very close to his heart. You were telling me earlier this week about the comparison in terms of the qualifications from Zimbabwe. When you talk to us about that a bit, when you wanted to become an advocate and you had studied in Zimbabwe, when you come to South Africa, you just had to do a few courses before being admitted as an advocate.
Yes. No, Zimbabwe, I think one of the stories of Zimbabwe has been the, in fact, let's look at these images now. And what we're seeing now is the casket that has just been taken off the plane. And you see, looks like members of the military. There'll be very high-ranking military officials, the Air Force, and the police, as well as the army that are escorting and carrying the casket of the former president. Coming home for the very last time, a man who traveled the world as president for many, many years. And in fact, you know, he spent 10 years in prison, and then he went to Mozambique, where he fled from the security forces of Rhodesia at the time. And when he came back to Zimbabwe, the first rally that he held in Harare was attended by so many people. We hadn't seen anything like that in the country at any time. So his first return to Zimbabwe from exile, fighting the liberation war for Zimbabwe, back, I think, just after the Lancaster House talks in the late 70s. In many ways, we're looking now at his last return from an outside country. And he'll be buried this weekend with full military honors, no doubt. So there we go, as you can see these images. Very somber in many ways, but soldiers very ceremonial in the way that they approach these kinds of things. And this is a former head of state, so this is not an ordinary citizen that's being carried by these military officers from the police, the army, and the Air Force. President Robert Gabriel Mugabe died at 95 years old, was president of the country for 37 years, and his politics go back to the early 50s, I would say, early 60s, when he joined the liberation movement. He was teaching in Ghana, came back to Zimbabwe during a holiday, and pretty much was co-opted by the leadership of the party at the time. Because he was so eloquent and so bright, they figured that he would probably be a good person to put in the front of the struggle. And he led from the front ever since. And as I said, he spent 10 years in jail from 1964 to 1974. He was jailed for sedition by Ian Smith's Rhodesian government. Let's listen in a little bit to the band. So those are images live from Harare. at the Robert Gabriel International Airport, an airport that was named in his honor not so long ago, actually in the last few years. And that's President Robert Mugabe coming back home from Singapore. He died at the age of 95. And the circumstances around his death not very clear, but he was a man that had advanced in age.
Yes, indeed, of course. So the remains will lie in state at the Rufaro Stadium that is in Harare on Thursday, tomorrow and Friday. This will be to allow the members of the public to pay their last respects. And then on Saturday, the body will then be taken to the National Sports Stadium where members of the diplomatic community, foreign envoys accredited to Zimbabwe and various dignitaries will also have that chance to bid farewell and also to pay their last respects.
All right, so we'll continue with our live coverage of what's happening in Zimbabwe, in Harare. In fact, let's see if we can go back to Zimbabwe. We don't have those pictures yet, but we will try and get back to them. But again, you know, this is going to be a story that's pretty long in telling. A man that lived for so long, that's led this struggle in many ways for many years before Zimbabwe became independent, and then became president in 1980. In fact, he was prime minister initially because Zimbabwe had a constitutional president who was, I suppose, non-executive in a sense, and that was President Kenneth Banana. So he was the first head of state, democratically elected, but he was prime minister at the time. And then they changed the constitution, and then he became executive president of Zimbabwe. And he's ruled the country to 2017, of course, when it's being termed a military coup. However, he resigned before the party could remove him from office. But he said that it was a coup, and perhaps his last few memories of his time would not be great. In fact, we spoke to a family representative, and he said that he was saddened by the way that he was removed from power at the end.
Yes, I remember just prior to the elections in that country, I think he was speaking to our foreign editor, Sophie Mugwena, and telling her that he wouldn't vote for the people who have tortured him. This, of course, referring to the current political party that is in government there in Zimbabwe. So I see on the visuals President Emmerson Mnangagwa and members of the military as well, as we continue to listen into the band.
bear in mind that there are people behind. We also want to shoot, but what do you think of yourself?
My friend, I'm trying to accommodate you.
No, you're not.
I was here before you. You should look for a strategic position before me. I'm trying to accommodate you guys. I'm also doing my work.
I do.
You asked me to
No, it's fine.
put my big down. I did.
His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa, the First Lady, Amai Auxilia Mnangagwa, and the bereaved Mugabe family members. Your Excellency, may I now invite the Senior Chaplain General for a prayer. Thank you.
Kuna Mwari vari kudenga nepanyika pano. Kuna Mwari vari kuona zvatakatarisana nazvo. Gore dema rakashanyira nyika yekwedu musi wechishanu nokutorwa kwevakanga vari mutungamiriri wenyika ino kumashure. Kuchema kwedu, kurwadziwa kwedu, makuona. Taungana panzvimbo ino, tine mutungamiriri wenyika yedu kuuya kuzogamuchira mutumbi nehama vadzoka kumusha. Taikumbira Mwari wamasimba ose kuti titsimutse meso edu kwamuri kumakomo, iko kunobva kunyaradzwa kwedu, iko kunobva kupukutwa kwemisodzi pamatama edu. Iyemi Jehovha makanga mapa, iyemi Jehovha ndimi matora. Nhasi uno hatina simba rokukunongedzerai kana kukupai mhosva, nokuti ndimi makanga matipa. Asi tongotenda kutungamirwa kwatakaitwa, tongotenda upenyu hurefu hwamakanga mavapa. Iyemi Mwari mutsvene munotaura zvinonzwika nemwoyo nendangariro. Ndimi mataakukumbira kuti mubate vemhuri, mubate mhuri yose yeZimbabwe, tichiisa programu yose mumaoko menyu kuti itungamirirwe nemi, kuti zvose zvinofanirwa kuitwa zviitwe nenzira nemutoo nenguva, kuti nyika yose nevemhuri togonyaradzwa. Takunamatai nokukukudzai muzita renyu Baba, neremwanakomana neremweya mutsvene, tose titi amen.
It is now my singular honor to invite His Excellency the President to address those here present. Your Excellency, sir.
The bereaved family, the Gushumo family, the First Lady, Amai Mnangagwa, the Vice President in absentia, General Chiwenga and Amai Chiwenga, the Honorable Vice President, retired Colonel Kembo Mohadi, the National Chairman of the ruling party, ZANU-PF, Comrade Opa Mchingui Kashiri, members of the Politburo of the ruling party who are here. Mazimambo edu, zvikuru sei, mukwazvimba vatinavo pano vauya kuzotambira baba vedu. The service chiefs and other officers of the Defense Forces of the Republic of Zimbabwe, the great people of this country, Zimbabwe, who are gathered here. Taunganidzwa pano kuti titambire our founding father of the nation of independent Zimbabwe, our revolutionary commander during our armed liberation struggle, an icon of Pan-Africanism, the man that created our nation, the man that led us to this day, has left us. We are gathered here to receive his body. We are grieved, and we say our sincere and deep condolences to the former First Lady who has brought the body, Amai Grace Mugabe, with us here, and the children who are also here, and the immediate family who are here. The entire nation of Zimbabwe, our people, across the board, are grieved and are in mourning because the light which led us to independence is no more. But his works, his ideology will continue to guide this nation. May I take this opportunity to say to you, the great people of Zimbabwe, that on the day we shall lay him to rest on Sunday, I appeal to you in your hundreds, in your thousands, in your millions, to show your love of our great leader who has left us. Today, as we live here, our icon and the commander will first pass through our commando where the military will say their prayer, and the body will proceed to the residency of our former president, the Blue Roof, today. Thereafter, the program will be announced by the ministry responsible, the Minister of Home Affairs. May I therefore appeal to you all to be peaceful, to be loving, to be united. Zimbabwe is ours together. We are one people, one nation. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. As His Excellency has already made it known to all of us, we are now proceeding to one commando. But may I please ask for your patience to allow His Excellency, the First Lady, and the immediate Mugabe family to depart. The rest of us will follow later. Thank you very much.
All right, so they're preparing to move the remains of the late former President Robert Mugabe now. This is after we've heard a prayer that was made, and the priest was just saying there, we welcome our leader, and he was basically saying to God that you've returned him from, who's come back from far away, and we don't question your wisdom in taking him away. And he asked God to bless the country and the people of South Africa. And then President Emmerson Mnangagwa then spoke for a few moments, Palesa.
Yes, indeed. The part that I heard, Peter, that
Yes.
was in English, of course, the president, they really praising the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, saying that he is the founding father of the nation of the independent Zimbabwe, and also conveying his condolences to the former First Lady Grace Mugabe and the children. And he making that appeal to Zimbabweans to say that this is the time for peace. This is the time for the nation to be one and to be united.
If you've just joined us, what the images that you're seeing now is the return of President Robert Mugabe, his remains being carried by the pallbearers, the members of the military, the security forces, the police, the Air Force and the Army. We've just heard from the president of the country, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who for a long, long time was one of President Mugabe's closest allies. And in fact, Emmerson Mnangagwa was in his first ever cabinet in 1980. He was the National Security Minister at the time, so one person who knows the president that's passed very, very well, worked together closely for many, many years. Towards the end, perhaps the relationship becoming a little strained, but at this time, President Mnangagwa and everybody that worked with President Mugabe over the years, remembering him for the contribution that he made to the liberation of Zimbabwe and his contribution to the continent at large. The widow, the former First Lady, Grace Mugabe, part of that entourage, the family went, of course, to many of the family members that weren't there already, went to get the body to come back to Zimbabwe. And so the procedures, and I would imagine for a former head of state, there's a lot of protocols that will need to play out over the next couple of days. And as you've been saying, the viewing of the body lying in state will be the first things that Zimbabweans will get an opportunity so that they can say their last farewells. The president earlier saying, please come and support this great leader in your thousands, hundreds of thousands and millions.
Yes, indeed. So those are still the live visuals out of Zimbabwe. The body of the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has just arrived, in fact, a few minutes ago from Singapore. And as Peter said, there's a number of activities that are lined up to happen from tomorrow. The remains will lie in state on Thursday and Friday. This will be to allow the members of the public to pay their last respects on Saturday. It will be taken to the National Sports Stadium, where members of the diplomatic community, foreign envoys accredited to Zimbabwe, and other various dignitaries will also have that chance to bid farewell and also to pay their last respects to this African icon. And then on Sunday, we will then see the official funeral service of the former president.
All right, so President Robert Mugabe, and all eyes, I guess, will be on who will come to bid their last farewells in terms of sitting heads of state, sitting presidents, many of which were very young, actually, when President Mugabe first became president in 1980. So he was seen as one of the fathers of the continent for so many years, always gaining respect wherever he traveled. And, well, as I said, all eyes will be on Zimbabwe on Sunday in particular, when he's finally laid to rest. But his body has arrived back from Singapore, and people mourning, and some people perhaps in quiet reflection with their own thoughts about what this man represented to him, to them, and to the country, particularly in the years that he was president.
Yes, indeed. The funeral will be paid for by the cash-strapped Zimbabwe government. This, of course, has to happen because he is the former president of the country.
Yes, indeed. And again, everything happening at the National Sports Stadium across the road from Heroes Acre on Sunday. And I would imagine that in the next few days as well, there will be those kinds of respects being paid. What I can tell you, if you're in South Africa, is that the various, at the embassy and also various consulates in Johannesburg and I believe in Cape Town, a book of condolences has been set up by the Zimbabwean authorities, Zimbabwean embassy, and if you want to go and sign this book of condolences, it is available at the High Commission here in Pretoria, and also the consulates in Johannesburg as well as Cape Town, I believe. All right, so these are live images that you're seeing here from Robert Mugabe International Airport, where the body of former President Robert Mugabe has just arrived. A prayer has been said in his name, and the President of the country, Emmerson Mnangagwa, receiving the President on behalf of the nation, welcoming him home, and calling on the nation to remember and praise someone he described as the icon of Pan-Africanism that was the founding father to Zimbabwe. Of course, at the front of very important negotiations in 1979 at Lancaster House that eventually saw elections happen in 1980 in Zimbabwe, and that was when Robert Mugabe was elected president of the country. And then on the 18th of April 1980 at Rufaro Stadium, where his body is going to lie in state, the flag of the United Kingdom was laid down, was brought down, and the new Zimbabwe flag was raised, and enter a new era, an independent country, and the first democratically elected head of state, and that was Robert Mugabe. This this motorcade begins his last journeys before he's finally laid to rest. And I'm going to tell you, when he came back in January 1980 to Zimbabwe, he'd been away living in Mozambique in exile because he'd just come out of jail. The first rally that he held, the reception that he got, one couldn't believe just what had happened. And it was the beginning of an era. Many people very hopeful about what his leadership was going to bring to the country. There were enemies of his old guard. This assassination attempt when he came back. But he survived a lot of that, and a lot of trials and tribulations over his tenure as president. Many people grateful for the many things that he did and things that can be attributed to him, particularly in areas such as education, Some would say that he did well with land reform. Others would look at that land reform story and say that it wasn't done in a way perhaps that benefited the country ultimately. But no question, in the end, a lot of land was returned to black people in the country. So a lot of supporters there carrying the flag, the picture of President Robert Mugabe, and singing praise.
Quite a number of Zimbabweans there. They actually came out in their large numbers, Peter, and I think this also talks to the amount of support that he still enjoyed as the former president.
Yeah, look, that this man was influential in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwean politics will never be taken away from him. How people will remember him, people will make their own decisions, but again, you know, if you take a look at the chronology, there were different periods in his life, different contributions that he made, and people will remember the bits that they prefer, and perhaps accept some of his failings, because like most human beings, he wasn't a perfect individual. But at this time, I think Zimbabweans will come together and recognize that he was a founding father of the country, and that he contributed in many ways before and after the revolution, even if perhaps part of that story may not be as well as they would have liked to remember. But for now, for today, I think a lot of people are looking at this and thinking, when we tell the story of how Zimbabwe became independent, Robert Mugabe will be one of those figures that feature prominently in that story that's being told.
Yes, indeed, and you also have lots of South Africans who've praised him for his decisiveness when it comes to the issue of land reform, giving back the land to the black people in 2000. But on the other hand, an exercise which was in a way sort of characterized by violence, and which led Zimbabwe to where it is now in terms of the economy.
The images we're seeing there, that looks like Grace Mugabe, the wife of the late president, who's being taken away now as part of this motorcade, this entourage. It'll be a difficult time for her. She was a young woman when she married the former president, and stood by his side throughout his time. And so this will be a difficult time for her, as it would be for any woman who loses a husband.
Yes, indeed. All right, so what you're seeing now, it's the live visuals, the motorcade leaving the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport in Zimbabwe. And of course, the body arrived there from Singapore, where the former president died at the age of 95. Funeral service will take place on Sunday, and as Peter said, a number of dignitaries are expected to attend the funeral service on Saturday. You would have all the dignitaries paying their last respects to the former president, and the Zimbabweans will also have an opportunity to do so on Thursday, which is tomorrow, and on Friday as well.
All right, I suspect that along the roads, because it's quite a long road from the airport, particularly into the center of the city, that along the way people will be aware that this motorcade will be passing through. So I have a feeling that right along that road there'll be lots of people just standing outside watching the motorcade pass by. These are historic moments. You know, it's not every day that somebody of his stature and his significance passes on, particularly who's had such a significant hand in the history of the country. So many people will be stepping out, and you know, that more than half of the people in Zimbabwe have only ever known him as president of the country, have only ever known him as the president. And that was, of course, before President Mnangagwa ascended to power a couple of years ago. So, you know, if you talk to young people, all they know was they had a president called Robert Mugabe, and that's the life that they've always known. It's a significant time in the country's history for sure.
It's like the crowd is making their way out of the airport now as the motorcade has already left the place.
Yeah.
Well,
Right. Yeah, we'll leave it there for the time being, but we'll certainly be giving you up-to-date and live coverage where we can. We have reporters on the ground there beyond our correspondent. I know that our foreign editor is flying there. We'll be getting reports trying to get a sense of how the country is mourning the former president. And hopefully we'll be able to bring you that story as it continues to unfold.
Yes, indeed. And I must say that I cannot help but to marvel how you remember all the dates from the top of your head.
I lived through it.
And now we know how old you are, don't we? All right, so we're taking a quick break here on SA Today. There's still so much more to come. Stay with us.